following program is intended for mature audiences.
Like, everybody needs to be woke.
Rudy's Revelation.
Google me, bitch! Google me!
Rudy's Revelation.
Everyone, welcome to the podcast. It is Tuesday, September 3rd. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the episode. You're going to have to excuse, I had a couple snafus yesterday when I was going live. For some reason, I got logged out of Rumble and the live cast ended after 16 minutes, so you have to excuse that. But thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, give me a thumbs up. Check me out on social media as well. So I say we should get right into the headlines. What we found out is the people closest to Kamala Harris know her the best, and that's why she's not letting the press very close to her at all. The CNN interview last week did not dispel anything about what people thought about Kamala Harris. So let's get into the headlines right now. Thanks for joining me again today for today's episode. Appreciate you all being here on this Tuesday. So we're going to start out, I think, here with Fox News, which keeps on repeating this headline every day, which everybody else should be paying attention to as well. 44 days. Kamala Harris has yet to do a formal press conference since emerging as Democratic nominee. Harris finally ended interview drought, as Democratic candidate on Thursday. And as I said, she had, you have to excuse me, I got a little sinus infection going on, so if I'm sniffling. But as I said, that she's not letting the press near her because she's an idiot and she's going to screw things up for her. But already the luster is starting to wear off. There was a lot of buildup, a lot of emotional momentum with these rallies that now, since time has gone past, we have seen that were ginned up. In some instances, sending buses around to bus in people and actually paying people to attend. So I'm going to go back to the CNN article just very briefly. Vice President Kamala Harris interview drought finally ended on Thursday, but after 44 days as a presumptive and now official Democratic nominee for president, she has yet to hold an official press conference. Now, what is a press conference? A press conference is where you go in front of the general press, not your favorite press, not, picked out people. You could call on whoever you want, obviously, but open to the general press. And you need to take at least 6, preferably a dozen questions, and allow for follow-ups. That's the most important thing. So getting back to this article from Fox, as when she will actually do a formal press conference, the day may never come. Sunday marked exactly 6 weeks since Biden dropped out of the race and endorsed Harris. No other Democratic challenged her, and she quickly wrapped up the nomination from there. You will not see one press conference from her for the next 75 days until the election. Fox News contributor Joe Concha said, or predicted, Newsbusters managing editor Curtis Hawk feels the vice president obviously owes it to the American people to hold a freewheeling press conference where reporters can, unlike what happened Thursday with CNN's Dana Bash, ask follow-up questions. For every softball from, say, ABC, NPR, you'll hope a liberal journalist will show some courage to do the right thing, Hawk told Fox News Digital. what you will see is that will never happen. Apparently now, Kamala Harris is trying to get out of the debate, the only debate she agreed to, which was the ABC debate, and blaming the fact that Trump wants to change the rules when actually it's her that wants to change the rules. Moving on to more articles from Fox. Gold Star family slammed Kamala Harris for playing politics over Trump's visit to Arlington National Cemetery. Gold Star father says Harris' statement was heinous, vile, and disgusting. And going right to the article here, Gold Star families who lost loved ones in the Bosch Afghanistan withdrawal blasted Vice President Kamala Harris over her attack on former President Trump for his controversial visit to Arlington National Cemetery last week. Harris accused Trump of playing politics with the Monday visit, but in a series of short videos, 8 family members said they had invited Trump and bitterly blasted Biden-Harris administration over the disastrous pullout that left 13 U.S. service members dead 3 years ago. Earlier on Saturday, the article goes on to say a vice president criticized Trump team for taking photographs and videos on a wreath-laying ceremony event on Monday. The Army said that Arlington National Cemetery official was abruptly pushed aside. They're saying that it was physical altercation, but they're speaking figuratively that she was pushed aside, meaning that she was dismissed. Her concerns were dismissed because Trump and his entourage, which included photographers, were invited for the family. So it's not a political event. And I'll just read the rest right here. While making sure that the Trump's team was made aware of federal laws, Army regulations, and DOD policies which clearly prohibit political activities of the cemetery grounds. My point being is that it was a wreath-laying ceremony for the dead servicemen. Donald Trump was a guest of the families, and him and his entourage were invited by the family. And the photographs and video were requested by the family. Plus, and if it's a press event, also has some newsworthiness. It's not, what the rules state is that you can't go into Arlington Cemetery and produce or video or photograph a campaign ad, hold a press conference, whatever. This is not a blatant campaign advertisement. This was just featuring Donald Trump, who was invited by the family. And so there is some discrepancy about whether that was or was not a campaign event. It wasn't a campaign event. It was a wreath-laying ceremony where a candidate for president was attending. Who was attending? So the article goes on to say, why did we want Trump there? Says Mark Schmitz, one of the family members. It wasn't to help his political campaign. We wanted a leader that explains why you and Joe didn't get the call, referring to a letter that he sent to Kamala Harris. Darren Hoover, the father of Marine Staff Sergeant Taylor Hoover, also said that Harris lacks empathy and basic understanding about Monday's event and stressed that Trump's appearance was respectful. So there you go. Who are you going to listen to, bureaucracy or the families of the fallen? Moving on to other news here from the Federalist. Democrat-controlled states refuse to clean voter rolls and fix election problems. I'll read directly from the story here. President Joe Biden has vowed to veto the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, which simply requires proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. Not to vote, to register, which is required anyway in most cases. His promise was made in reaction to congressional Republicans who want to include it with any of the continuing resolution required to fund the next fiscal year, which begins on October 1st. The president's adamant opposition to what most Americans support demonstrates just how much Democrats are dedicated to making it easier to cheat in the elections. On December 16, 2020, a chairman for the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs held a hearing titled Examining the Irregularities in 2020 Election. In spite of the waiting and gnashing of teeth from the election irregularity deniers, there was many indisputable irregularities. And I continue. From the Federalist, in Wisconsin, 170,000 faulty absentee ballots in Milwaukee and Dane County were improperly counted by election clerks. Representatives of the far-left Zuckerbucks program, which is designed to pour left-wing dollars into local election offices, benefited their Democratic candidates and posed such heavy-handed direction in Green Bay that the local election clerk resigned from the stress and allowed Zuckerberg's minions to run the election. They go on to say, in Democracy in the Park, Democracy in the Park was allowed in Madison, where activists unlawfully collected 17,300 ballots. Seniors in nursing homes voted without required voting deputies present, bordering on elder abuse for political gain. As was the case in other states, election observers were not allowed and effectively observed the election process. More recently, as one of many examples of the states cleaning voter rolls, Virginia canceled 6,303 non-citizen voter registrations. Unfortunately, the election irregularity deniers have been so effective, aided and abetted by the corporate media, that these abuses have not only been ignored, but those who wish to cheat in the 2024 election have been able to devise new election fraud schemes. Absent media scrutiny, Republicans are undertaking efforts to stop them. I'm going to go on from the article. In one of the most closely contested states, Wisconsin, governor there denied 9 election reforms passed by the Republican legislature and designed to restore confidence in our state election system. The Wisconsin Election Commission refuses to remove more than 4 million ineligible voters from out-of-date voter rolls. Wisconsin has apparently 3.5 million eligible voters. Election integrity starts with cleaner voter rolls, and by refusing to clean up, Wisconsin's Democrats are clearly stating they would rather leave room for fraud than increase confidence in our election system. And that's one of the problems here going from in 2020, not only in 2016, but in 2020, in 2024. People are skeptical, people that are skeptical of the election process, but they don't do anything to build confidence in the election system. Voter ID would certainly be one, but the point is the media is not, people are saying there was no fraud, and that's just not true. There was a lot of irregularities, there was a lot of fraud, but just because the courts didn't take up the cases, that doesn't mean there was evidence. Most of the cases had good standing, but they just refused to hear them because the point was if there weren't enough fraudulent votes, they couldn't change the election, so why look at that in the first place? That's a criminal matter. That's not a suit to overturn an election. Is what the suits wanted was to have a new election, and the judges weren't going to see that. Weren't going to hear cases that couldn't prove that. But there were cases of fraud, et cetera, et cetera. Moving on to other headlines in the news, the New York Post, migrants flooding the New York City's justice system, making up 75% of arrests in Midtown as pathetic sanctuary city laws handcuff cops. Across New York, recently arrived migrants are flooding the criminal justice system at far higher rates, and the officials have not acknowledged. Police sources shared with the Post a staggering estimate that as many as 75% of the people they've been arresting in Midtown Manhattan in recent months for crimes like assault, robbery, and domestic violence are migrants. And the reason they say estimates is because of the sanctuary laws and laws in New York, particularly New York City. You're not allowed to ask someone's legal resident status. And in some, in some counties and states and what have you, you're not even in the arrest, you're not even allowed to denote what race somebody is. So in Midtown Manhattan in recent months, like crimes like assault, robbery, and domestic violence are done by migrants. In parts of Queens, the figure is more like 60%. Sources there estimate. On any given day, the Big Apple criminal court dockets are packed with asylum seekers who have run afoul of the law. We have more headlines from the New York Post here. New York City migrant shelter overrun by teen fight club. Constant shriek in his residence rip disturbance becoming unbearable. And so if you didn't know anything about this, it's the residents of a Queens apartment building saying they've hardly had a moment's peace since January when a 128-room hotel in Long Island City had become transformed into a city-run migrant shelter. The children living there in the 7-story building loiter outside in the front entrance in large unsupervised groups late at night. Claim residents next door at 911 44th Drive from 8 p.m. until well past midnight. The kids fight and chase each other around, shouting, screaming, and disrupting neighbor sleep. Can't have that. I mean, I have my own issues with people, with neighbors and whatnot making noise. The great thing about my neighborhood, what I liked about my neighborhood, is that when we moved in, it's unusually quiet, which is great. And, we have to clamp down on people, put their dogs out, and the dogs are outside barking unattended. And people doing other things that disrupt the quiet nature of the neighborhood. In any case, I just turn my music up when I hear that. You want noise? I got noise. And so I could see, but the point is, and the argument against illegal immigrants always is they shouldn't even be here. So any crime, homicides, accidental deaths relating illegal immigrants, noise, any other crime is people's response to it is they shouldn't even be here. And that's a good point because they shouldn't. If the United States perhaps wants to set up housing in other countries to house people that want to get here during their asylum process, they could do that outside the country. Or house people in detention centers, which they likely do near the border. But Democrats decry that. Why are you imprisoning people who illegally cross the border? Because you can't let them into the general population of the country. Will they disappear forever? Anyway, point of the headline today in today's episode is a revisiting of sorts by the Daily Caller of a book that is entitled The Truce, Progressive Centrists and the Future of the Democratic Party, that I think was released in January. And this book that the authors interviewed former aides and staffers of the White House, and even some current staffers of the White House, and that talked about a variety of different subjects around the Democratic Party where people are leaving the sinking ship because the Democratic Party first has gone against its proclaimed roots and become the corporate party, the party of the rich elite, and have gone against the middle class so-called roots of the Democratic Party, which I think they took on as a mantle and they had to pay lip service to, but they never really did much for the middle class. Anyway, Raising taxes doesn't help the middle class. Raising inflation rates doesn't help the middle class. So in any case, this new book exposes the fact that high-profile Democrats, Joe Manchin, Tulsi Gabbard, have left the party, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and more, that was detailed way back in 2015. Regular voters from the Democratic Party have left and came over to the Trump, because the Democratic Party, or at least some faction of it, used to be anti-establishment. And there were a lot of Bernie supporters and things like that. But the thing is people are starting to realize that they aren't fighting the establishment. They are the establishment. Basically, what they claimed in 2016, that Trump wasn't fighting the establishment, he is the establishment, was actually what they were. And this book lays that out. So the Daily Caller resurrected this book that came out in January, specifically because it came out before Kamala Harris made her bid for president of the United States and leader of the free world. So the headline from the Daily Caller is, "She ain't made for this. Harris aides White House staffers vilify her in expository book." And going on with the story here, little hang up. 1 second. So it starts, I'm just going to quote from the story here. It was rotten from the start. A top aide from her 2020 campaign noted, "A lot of us, at least folks I was friends with on the campaign, all realized that, yeah, this person should never be president of the United States," the aide told the authors. The book, authored by Hunter Walker and Lupe B. Lupin, was written and published long before Harris was coronated as heir apparent of the Democratic Party's presidential ticket. The scathing quotes from insiders of her failed 2020 campaign painted a picture of Harris as vapid and an ineffectual leader who offers no clear picture of who she is politically or how she would govern as president. And that's really all that, you could read the whole story on the Daily Caller, or you could even go and read this book, The Truce, Progressive, Centrist, and the Future of the Democratic Party, which will probably give you some clear insight into that. But the reason the Daily Caller brought it up is because it was written before she was made head of the Democratic ticket for president, and that exposed, her failings just as a politician and as any sort of intellect. Moving on to other headlines here from the Federalist, the now forgotten climate crisis was just a cynical ploy for Democrats to gain power, indeed. And reading from the story here, Vice President Kamala Harris, who mentioned the topic just once in her acceptance speech at the recent Democratic National Convention, according to the New York Times. The Times also noted that Harris has not offered any new policies for addressing climate change. Every candidate seeking the Democratic nomination, including Harris, warned of the dangers posed by climate change. In fact, she dubbed the matter an existential threat to who we are as human beings, and announced she was prepared to get rid of the filibuster to pass the Green New Deal. No ambiguity there. Indeed. Well, my feelings on the climate crisis and climate change. That once was global warming, and I was reading news when they were warning us of a new ice age and all these different things. And that's just to scare you to make energy more expensive. Now, are there pollutants? Yes. Are there greenhouse gases exist? What the nature and what the actual effect of all this is? Warming of the seas and stuff. Is the climate warming? Is it because of the sun, or is it because of man-made pollution? There's no definitive evidence. And if you're listening to me and saying you're a crazy Republican, I'm no fan of polluters or corporations, mind you, particularly chemical companies that put out most of these pollutants. But the fact is, they're not going after the chemical companies, are there? No, they're going after energy companies and energy producing plants, places that produce electricity. We need electricity, And our culture, our economy, and our civilization depends more and more on electricity than you would ever know. And especially with AI now, you need more electricity. The point is that they're just trying to price it out of your reach, because what the plans are, what the narrative is, what the agenda is, neo-feudalism. So a few on top that's going to have all electricity they need, and the masses on the bottom where everything's going to be rationed, including electricity. So you'll have lights. Like if you've ever been to a third world country, the electricity is only on for a certain amount of time because they can't generate enough electricity. Doesn't matter how much you pay. So everything's going to be rationed, including food, water, electricity. You're going to be kept in a sub your quality of life, but your standard of living will be subpar what you enjoy today. You could say this is a conspiracy theory, but if you know as much as I know, you can't reconcile the truth at all unless you said a lot of this is organized and done on purpose. That there's an agenda, a progressive agenda that's going in a certain direction that everybody's got to look out for. So next headline up here now, CNN World, Israeli strikers and protesters demand Israeli Gaza deal after 6 hostages killed. Now, the deal with this story is not about the Israeli strikers or protesters. What this is about is Benjamin Netanyahu. What this whole thing in Gaza was always about was Benjamin Netanyahu. The global left wanted him out of power. Not only out of power, because he's been in and out of power for decades. They wanted him permanently out of the political scene in Israel, on the global stage, what have you, because he is a conservative hawk and he's a nationalist. Can't have nationalists in a new world order where they don't want tight national borders. They want free movement of people. And there's a lot of economic ideas behind that. But the economic idea is if you flood the country with people that don't live there, that aren't citizens, it's going to undermine the standard of living for those citizens. And that's been proven out. And then you're going to have a problem with the clash of civilizations. And if people don't assimilate, like you see in Europe, you're going to have growing violence. And what happens when there's a upswell of violence and crime? You have to lean on the state to protect yourself, particularly if you don't have a Second Amendment or the right to have firearms. Also in international news, the BBC is reporting that the U.S. seizes Venezuelan President Maduro's plane. Now, the deal with this is there's a Falcon 900 ES aircraft that was seized in the Dominican Republic by the United States. Now, the foreign minister of Venezuela said the U.S. has justified itself with the coercive measures that they unilaterally and illegally impose around the world. Goes on to say, the U.S. officials said the plane was seized for suspected violations of U.S. export control and sanction laws. And before I want to go on to the last little tidbit of this story, that it's suspected violations of U.S. So they don't even have proof that there were violations of the sanctions on Venezuela. They just illegally seized the property of a foreign government, like they do this all the time, as Venezuela. And I'm no fan of Venezuela. Communist Venezuela, I should say. So they just took the guy's plane or took the country's plane under a suspected violation. And going back to this story, I just want to also point out that they talked about a Caribbean-based, a shell company to hide their involvement. They said the Venezuelan government and Mr. Maduro allegedly used a Caribbean-based shell company to hide their involvement. Now, who else, first of all, that's what you use shell companies for, to hide involvement. Who else recently used shell companies to hide his involvement in maybe a pay-for-play scheme politically in the United States? I don't know. Was it Joe Biden? Was it Hunter Biden? Could be. Okay, more news from NBC News, more headlines. How Elon Musk's endorsement of Donald Trump may have backfired. Donald Trump's embrace of Elon Musk's anti-union actions could have long-term consequences. And then we're going to go over a little bit of news that broke over the weekend. All right, so what we have here is the mainstream media, particularly NBC, says Elon Musk's endorsement, and if you're going to go left wing, it's like ABC and NBC are like tied, and then you have like CBS as a little less Democrat. How Elon Musk's endorsement of Trump may have backfired. So you have one of the most left-wing news organizations say that have been going on smearing Elon Musk and Donald Trump forever. And so you put the two smear campaigns together and you go, oh, that endorsement had backfired. Whatever you have to know about Elon Musk is that he is a very, very intelligent entrepreneur. And he was very progressive in technology. Very smart guy. So a very smart guy who has a lot of businesses is endorsing Donald Trump and wants the best, not only for America, but for humankind. The latter is debatable, but also in Elon Musk news, if you didn't hear, I reported this yesterday, the Wall Street Journal is reporting Brazil bans X, outlawing access to the app for millions. The order follows months of back and forth between the social media platform and Brazil's highest court. If you weren't with me yesterday, I reported from the New York Times that one of the Supreme Court judges in Brazil just banned the app because Elon Musk wouldn't close accounts of people they wanted accounts closed for. So what does that mean? So if you didn't know, a couple of years ago, it's already been a couple of years, Bolsonaro lost the election in a contested election, very similar to what happened here in the United States. And the Brazilian population, the electorate there, didn't believe it because Bolsonaro had overwhelming support, not even in traditional circles, but also in very big cultural circles like indigenous tribes in Brazil were supporting Bolsonaro and a strong nationalist ideas. Instead, they supposedly re-elected a former president, Lula da Silva, who was removed from office for criminal activity and jailed. And then it was the same exact Supreme Court that banned X, nullified his conviction so he could run as president. Now, Lula da Silva is a socialist. He's an avowed socialist. Some would say he's even a communist. So the communist authoritarian leaders in Brazil closed down X because they wouldn't ban people from speaking. You know, they say he wouldn't ban accounts that were doing certain things online. And they didn't say what it was. So maybe if they said what it was, we'd have was it child sex trafficking? No. Was it drug dealing? No. Was it dissent against the current government or regime in Brazil? Yes. Moving on to other international political news. The Associated Press, far-right German party's win has some fearing for the future. Others worry about a return to the past. Okay, the Associated Press. They're the worst. Deep discontent with national government notorious for infighting? Nope. Inflation? Yup. And a weak economy? Yup. Anti-immigration sentiment? Yup. And skepticism towards German military aid for Ukraine are among the factors that contributed to the support of the populist parties. A new party founded by a prominent leftist was the second big winner on Sunday and will probably be needed to form a state government since no one is prepared to govern with the AfD. Is the party that won, which is this guy, Hoke. And I don't know much about him and I don't care, but that's democracy. Whoever the people want to elect, they get to elect. So a populist or otherwise. So if the electorate says, I want this guy, Donald Trump, or this guy, Hoke, then they get that guy. That's democracy. Good or bad. You can't say, hey, we, the elite or the council of, the good people, if we all of a sudden don't want somebody that you elect, that we could just nullify their candidacy or the election. That's not what democracy is. That's authoritarianism. And that's why the authoritarians get out in front of it. They don't want to have an election and then say, hey, you can't, that guy that won in the primary or that guy that won the election, you can't have that guy. They just undermine those people immediately, which leads us to the next story from The Guardian, how China's internet police went from targeting bloggers to their followers in recent months following influential liberal bloggers have been interviewed by police as China widens its net of online surveillance. China's Ministry of Public Security and local public security bureau handling this individual that the story is about. His case could not be reached for comment, of course, but he and his fellow online idealists fell afoul of one of the foundational principles of the Chinese internet. Don't form a community, especially one that's related to politics, not even in private. What The Guardian doesn't say is don't speak, don't dissent. And that's the problem authoritarians always have, is whether it's here in this country or anywhere else, oh, we don't like what you're saying, so stop saying it. And then it used to be conspiracy theory, but that wasn't working anymore. So now they've trotted out the intelligence agency terms of misinformation and disinformation. But if you're not schooled in the arts of propaganda and misinformation and disinformation, you wouldn't know if you were, committing misinformation and disinformation. Story goes on to say Beijing, and again, it's The Guardian, so they never say anything about the communists. The whole article. I'm sorry. Being punished for comments made online is common in China and communist China, where the internet is tightly regulated, as well as a digital firewall that blocks the majority of internet users from accessing foreign websites like Google, Facebook, and WhatsApp. People who publish content on topics deemed sensitive or critical of the government often find themselves banned from websites or even worse. That's authoritarianism. That's communism. I mean, you could have a socialist government that isn't really authoritarianism, but the problem is the socialists usually get voted out if that's the case. So as soon as socialists and leftists get in, just like you see Democrats do in certain states, and then they develop a supermajority, is then they block any inroads Republicans or conservatives might make in those states. And they're trying to do that very same thing in the federal government right now. So you have to understand how the leftists work, how the socialists work. And then once they become entrenched, then they become more authoritarian and start taking away your liberties. You could just look at world history. I'm not blowing anything up your skirt. It's just more headlines. Daily Mail. Fears of cancer cover-up in states suffering mystery spike in tumors. A report published in early 2024 highlighted alcohol as a major health concern. Locals are trying to raise awareness about another contributor, agricultural chemicals, of which Iowa uses the most than any other state. Chris Jones, a retired research engineer and chemist at the University of Institute of Hydraulic Research, told Daily Mail that the taboo subject makes it difficult to get people to talk or do something about it. Article goes on to say, Mr. Jones, people know what to do. We know what to do and how, and that's to regulate the pollution from agriculture, but it's a taboo subject and it's hard to get anybody to talk, especially if they're still working. He said the state needs to introduce regulation into the agricultural industry, providing guidelines for the types of and amounts of fertilizers and pesticides used on crops, introduce a greater variety of crops, and add funding back to programs that monitor water quality. Indeed. Absolutely. Now, if you were with me yesterday, there was an article published in the New York Times just about this. It was more about PFAS, or forever chemicals that are, if you don't know what chemicals are, they don't use this term very much anymore, but it's petrochemicals. So most of the pharmaceuticals are, some of the painkillers are still opioid based, but most of the pharmaceuticals are made from petrochemicals, which are oil. And so all other oils, plastics or other types of plastics or other types of chemicals, most of the chemicals that are invented, made, or combined are made from petroleum, petrochemicals, petrochemical industry. So that leads us to our next article. And I could go briefly into the last article about Iowa and farming and their wide use of Roundup or glyphosate that puts atrazine into the water supply, which has dangerous effects on wildlife and people because it seeps in and it gets into the food, gets in the groundwater, etc. But I'm not going to digress too much because I want to stick with this. The Hill is reporting super small pieces of plastic are invading human brains, scientists say. The dangers of microplastics. Now I'm going to read directly from the article here. The world is filled with microplastics found in everything from the air and ocean water to common foods like chicken and rice, and according to a new study, even in the human brain. These tiny plastic particles can range in size from 5 millimeters, as small as a pencil eraser, to 1 nanometer, which can't be seen with the naked eye, the Environmental Protection Agency says. Researchers examine these shard-like particles in human organs, especially the liver, kidneys, and brain, using autopsy samples collected in Albuquerque, New Mexico from 2016 to 2024. The brain tissue samples came from the frontal cortex, which is responsible for abstract thinking, creativity, and motor tasks. Goes on to say, the most common type of plastic found was polyethylene, with greater amounts in the brain compared to the other tissue samples. Polyethylene is widely used to produce things like packaging, plastic bags, storage containers, and toys, according to the book Microfluidics for Cellular Applications. Because they're microfluidics. And so they get into your brain and they affect your reasoning and all these other abstract reasoning in particular, any kind of creative thought process. But what people don't also talk about is that this part of the brain also helps you with getting your head around the ideas of metaphysics, supernatural, things outside your perception. So thinking outside of the box, and that's abstract. That's part of abstract thinking. So what it's really doing is it's getting between you and God, if you were to believe in such things. But people were commenting for years that they're like, I don't feel as connected as I did. I feel like I'm in a fog and all these things. This has to deal with the war on your biology, not just in your food and your water and so forth, but it's in everything from the clothes you wear, if you wear polyester. And by the way, try to find 100% cotton garment these days. It's almost impossible. They put plastic in everything, and that's a danger. And there are a lot of dangers going on, but biologically, as I talked about yesterday, the sewage that they put on your crops and the crops for raising livestock feed, sewage is full of these PFASs or forever chemicals, microplastics et al., but they're also full of pharmaceutical residue that you urinate or shit out, or when people flush. That's why they tell you not to flush your pharmaceuticals anymore, because a lot of times it gets into the sewage that is spread on crops. In any case, moving on to other articles, stay with me now. Daily Mail, shocking leak suggests your phone really is listening in on your conversations. And the leak came from an apparent pitch deck from one of Facebook's marketing partners, appears to detail how the firm eavesdrops on users' conversations to create targeted ads. In a slideshow, Cox Media Group claims that its active listening software uses AI to collect and analyze real-time intent data, which is basically listening to your conversations, to what you say through your phone, not only through your phone, but listening to what you say even when it's active listening when your phone and laptop isn't even on, or home assistant microphone. That's why I don't have Alexa or anything else in my house. Advertisers compare this voice data with behavioral data. So they're pairing data, and behavioral data, as I often say, is that uses your cell phone, the front-facing camera and sensors, front-facing sensors on your cell phone, to read your facial emotional expressions while you're given data. That, you know, the data, whatever you look on your, you have to understand what you scroll through, even at the speed you're scrolling through, it looks at the influence it has on your behavior. So getting back to this article, the pitch deck goes on to say, to tout Facebook, Google, and Amazon as clients as CMG, suggesting that they could bring that they could be using its active listening service to target users. Sorry about that. I just wanted to say that, you know, when you're fed certain stimuli in your feed, and I try to tell my wife this all the time, it might not be from who you think it is, or you might not even know the person, but you're receiving stimuli, and then they measure your response. And so all this data is being put together. Behavioral data is what I was just explaining, with voice data to get marketers a better idea of what's going on with you. Thanks for joining me today, today's episode. Stay tuned tonight for another episode of Tuesdays with Perry. I think it's episode 90. Also, don't forget to engage my channel. Like, subscribe, give me a thumbs up, share the podcast, leave a comment. And as I said earlier, don't forget you're under attack. Check out my other website, libpop.org, learn about libertarian populism, or check out my website, rudysrevelation.com. Check out the audio podcast there. And I'll see you tonight for Tuesdays with Perry, or check out my Rudy's Revolution episode tomorrow morning. I go live on Rumble every day, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Very soon to stream live to other platforms as well. I'm working on that right now. So thanks for joining me today. Stay hip to the trick. Respect.
You can't handle the truth.
Rudy's Revelation.
Google me, bitch! Google me!